Welcome once again to the J Lowe Artist YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me on this artistic adventure. Today we'll be working with ink, pen and ink. So have your kneaded eraser, a number 2 or an HB pencil handy, and any type of ink that you would like to use. But make sure that it's archival, that it's permanent, that it's black, and a smooth ink. And let's start doing some ink drawing. So the first thing we do when we start out using ink is we want to figure out where everything goes. You can draw it directly if you want to with ink, but I find that most people, especially when they're beginning ink drawing, they like to map things out. So the number 2 pencil and the kneaded eraser are really wonderful to have around. So let's go ahead and map this out. Remember to start with simple shapes. Sometimes you want to just divide up your picture plane. And in here, almost right in half, not quite, but almost right in half. So if you go down to half of your page and then you drop down a little bit, you just make a little line across there and say, that's where that bridge is going. That's where I want that bridge to go. Somewhere right in there. You can raise it or lower it. And you can say, well, I want that edge of that angle to be right there. Kind of angles over a little bit right there. And put it off to the side. Well, that already will say, well, then the rest of the building is going to come up maybe about that high. So you just put in a rectangle. This is where I want that part of the castle to go. And then it's got a top to it, so a triangle, maybe down in there somewhere. Drop down in here. And you just sketch in using simple shapes, rectangles, triangles, whatever you need to. Just keep it simple. Because once we establish where everything goes, then we have to alter it. We change it. We make it bigger or smaller, or whatever is needed. Because nothing is ever perfect right from the start. Also, if you want to do these trees, you can kind of just block it in and say, well, there's a tree over here, and there's a tree over here. You don't have to draw in limbs and things like that. We'll do that with the pen. But you do want to block it in. Get it to go where it's supposed to go. Usually in European buildings, they didn't have a lot of space. The upper stories would jut out from the lower stories, and so the top of the building would be bigger than the bottom of the building. And you'd think, well, that's not very structurally sound, but they are very strong. Some of them have lasted thousands of years. I lived in a building that was built in 1364. It's over 600 years old, and it was very sound. It had settled over the years, and so the floor wasn't exactly straight. But it was still very strong. And if you want to, you can put in the little arches on the bridge as well, if you want to. There's a little arch there, and a little arch there. And what you're seeing through the arches is the reflection on the water. Throw that in there. And the reflection, don't worry too much about the reflection. We'll get that with our pencil or with our ink. But if you wanted to, you could just do some lines to just show where those reflections are going to go. So you could just kind of drop them down, do something along those lines. Remember, they're just opposite what's there. It's a mirror image. So you just kind of mirror what you see. And I'll show you how to do the water. The water really is going to be the easiest part, and therefore we're going to leave it to the end. And you may be thinking to yourself, oh, that's hard to believe because it's really detailed. But remember, we're just creating an illusion. We're not really creating a lot of those details. And don't get too concerned about your pencil, because it's all going to get erased. It becomes a guide. That's all this is a guide. The good thing about buildings is they're not too intimidating. If the roof is slightly different, bigger, smaller, or the windows aren't in the right place, it's a big deal. Nobody's going to fault you there. This is why drawing people is more difficult, because you got to get all those parts in the right place. I'm just going to block in where I think the windows go. Just going to put in a little block there, a little block there. I'm not too concerned if they're not quite perfect. This top part of this tower over here is hidden behind those trees, and I think I'll leave them hidden there. I kind of like those trees overlapping here. One thing that you remember, that anything that is round, so your eye level line is about right up in here somewhere. And so everything above the eye level line on a rounded surface is going to arch like this. So you've got all these arches, and the higher up you go, the more arch there is. And anything below it is going to arch up. That's called perspective. So that's really, for me, that's about it. I don't really see a lot of other stuff for me to put in there. I guess I could put in these little gun ports up here. These little One of my favorite things to do when traveling through Europe is, I call it castle hopping, going from one castle to another. The important thing here is technique. So normally I start out with the castle, but I think I'm going to start out with the trees. And I'm going to show you some tree techniques. I'm going to start with this tree over here, and then I'll work over to this one. When you're doing trees, the biggest thing is they're kind of fluffy, especially when they're leafed out like this. And you see very little branches in there. So the branches are kind of the last things you do. Normally we think of starting out with the tree trunk and all the branches, and then we add the leaves. But here, the leaves are dominant and the branches are kind of in between. And so we're just going to start out with little M's and U's. Okay, M's on the top, U's on the bottom. Let me show you what I mean by that. So here's a little branch. It's kind of coming off there, off the top. And they're basically little M's. You can do dots and dashes. So just as the kind of comes out, there's some branches out here. And they could just be kind of hanging out. On the top, they're M's, and on the bottom, they're U's. And where you see darkness, you just put more. So I can put a few more over here, but it gets light out here, and so I do less. And like I say, you could have them just kind of hanging out there. So they're just, and everybody gets the idea. Oh, those are trees. And like I say, if you think they're should be a little darker, just do more of them. And then less where it's lighter. So where it's really light, you just kind of leave them out. So just go ahead and just kind of get the feeling of these trees with these little M's and U's. They're just little bumps. Bumps on the M's on the top, U's on the bottom. And like I say, you can just have them hanging out there. A limb does not have to look like it's attached, because then you think, oh, those are just lighter leaves, and you don't see them. So if you do see them and they're a little darker, just do more. The other thing you can do is, because some of these are really quite dark, and you think, well, it's so dark, maybe you could just hatch through it and do little hatched marks, because you know it's going to be dark, and then M's on top, M's and U's on top of the hatched marks, because you just got to get enough ink in there to look dark. And if you want to, and you think, well, I can see some of that limb in there, you can do the limb by just hatch marks through there. Here's a limb. It's going to come up. There's another end to it here. Maybe it comes up over there. And there's my limb. We're trying to avoid lines all around things. Okay, normally through junior high, you've done a line around something, then you fill it in. Here, we're doing the texture and allowing the edges to take care of themselves. So just spend a little bit of time on that tree and just make it look soft and leafy. And it's almost like scribbling. You're just scribbling in texture. But when you're all done, everybody will go, oh, I get it, that's a tree. Scribble, scribble, scribble. So I just scribble that in, and then I'm just going to go M's and U's. Like I say, don't be afraid to just leave some hanging out there, not attached to anything. Isn't that the easiest tree you've ever drawn? Well, we're not quite done with it, but you get the idea. Here's some more branches. Just scribble through them till they hit the leaves, and then they disappear. I'm looking at my scrap. I'm kind of trying to follow the lights and darks I see, but not verbatim. It's just mostly inspiration. Now, with the building, as we go along, remember, we're going to try to avoid edges. So rather than draw a line and say, okay, this is where my building goes, I'm going to allow the brick, the tiles, all those things to create my own edges. And some of these are really kind of hard to see. So I'm going to use dots and dashes. I'm going to start, let me zoom into the roof line here. It's a pretty small picture, so it's going to get kind of fuzzy. But some of these little finials too, you see like these little edges around here, but you don't see the uprights. So don't draw them in. If you can't see it, don't draw it in. So I'm going to start with this little chimney that's right here. I'm just going to start out with just a couple little dots and dashes, a couple little zigzaggy lines down it. There's part of that chimney. Here's some dots and dashes. There's some brick through here. Rather than draw a line, I'm just going to draw a few little dots and dashes for the brick. Here's dots, dashes. It gets a little darker down here, so maybe a few more dots and dashes as we go. But that's basically it. Goes down to the roof line. And I can kind of come in and go, okay, I can see where this roof line is. I'm just going to do a little dash right there. There's my roof line. And then it comes down. I can see the dark edge that is underneath the roof. And so I'm going to throw that in as just a little arch. And this little edge over here, I can hardly see it. A little ledge that goes right along there. I'm going to just put that in with some dots and dashes. And then my windows, I know I can't see this. They look like they're open, but they're probably not. So now I've just established that top of that tower. I can go ahead and finish my roof line with dots and dashes. This side is really light, so I'm going to have less dots. One thing you can do too is, you know that it's a cone and it's right in the middle. So you can go from the middle of your tower, go straight up and put a little dot up there and say, okay, that's the middle of my tower right there. That's where I want everything to go to. So you can do a couple little dots that way, a couple little dots this way. Those little finials on top, little iron finials, these they used to put these on before Ben Franklin was around, and they often got struck with lightning. Imagine that, huh? Many castles started on fire by being struck by lightning. Now, before I do the tile, I want to do this little dormer window thing that's right here. It's really kind of hard to see, but it's just a little triangle. Then there's a little roof attached onto it. I'm just going to do little dots and dashes. A little triangle down here of dashes and dots. A little hatch through it right there, and there's my little dormer window. Now you just hatch through it. You go, okay, there's some little, I don't know what these are, these little beams up in here, but I'm just going to put little dots and dashes. Don't really see what those are, but it doesn't matter. There's probably, I think these are kind of window-like things there. So I'm just going to hatch through them, put a few little dots and dashes, and there it is. Here's some tile for the roof, just a little in the shadow, and that's all you need. I'm going to get rid of my graphite. That's always the fun part. Now I need some tiles there. I can see it's gray, I can see it's dark, but I can't really see what's going on. I know that there's got to be tiles, and I know it's round. And so as I go through, I'm going to do little arches, just arch through it. So back and forth, little arches. And I'm going to do more on the right side, more on the left side, its right side, and less on the right side because it's lighter. I'm just barely touching my paper. That is something that you want to practice. There's a couple of reasons why we do that. Number one is you get a much thinner line. It skips across the surface, so you get this broken line. The other one is it saves your pen because you don't want a lot of friction on your pen. I'm just going to keep going over that. And if I have not enough line, I can go back into it, into the middle of each line that I did. Or on the right side, if I think, oh, I need more there, I can come back from my right side. You just do a couple, or little dots or dashes, or whatever I feel like I need. I'm just going to continue that through. And even on this ledge, do the same thing. And if it's a little darker, just go in between some that you did. Oftentimes when it rains, over the course of 100 years or so, it's going to deposit mineral deposits around it, and they get a little darker. So sometimes walls of the castle have little darker edges where the water drips down, especially if you're close to a moat, because it's going to have a little more moisture there. Here's a little tower coming off the other side. I'm just going to do that with this little arch. There's part of my tower. Right in the middle, I'm going to go straight up, decide where I want the top of that tower. Then I'm just going to do these little back and forth in a triangular look. Touch up my edges. There's a roof. Piece of cake. Touch up your edges. Here's the little finial on top. I do a little half circle, like a little U shape, because I know it's going to be lighter on top. You can put a little dot or a little dash. Remember to do less line than you think you need. You can always go back into it and add more. One thing that I love to do, and this is really kind of fun, if you notice these little supports that are under here, let me zoom into it even further. Notice how they're like little U shapes, and there's all these little supports, but they get kind of darker when you can look into them. So in this way, they're a little darker right there, and on this side, they're a little darker over on this edge. And notice that they're closer together and thinner on the edges, and then they get a little wider and more separated towards the middle. And so that's what I'm going to do. As I do my little drawing, I can come down and I can just kind of put in some little dots and dashes. It's kind of broken. And if you want to, you notice they're stepped. In other words, this is called corbelling, is where you start out with one that's a little tighter, and then the next one is out a little bit more, then out a little bit more, then out a little bit more. That whole idea of corbelling. You can draw that in with your pencil if you want. And then I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to do some little rounded edges. And as I get towards the middle, I'm going to even it out, have a little less. And then as I go towards the edge, I'm going to get a little tighter as well, a little thinner. Okay, does that make sense? And this works with all sorts of things that are round. If you're doing barrels, then the little strips of wood are tighter, thinner together on the edges. Now I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to put little steps there, little dots. Little dots like this. You can hatch through them. So it ends up looking, and these are just dots, but yet you know what it is. You put little dots under there, just where those little guidelines were. I like to just hatch through them because that's kind of a shadow. And it doesn't really matter which direction they go. Now, you know that there's rock in there, but you want to tell your viewer that it's rock without drawing every little rock. So what you do is just dots and dashes. Same kind of thing we did here, but less line. So I'm just going to dot and dash. I'm just going to kind of go through and just little dots, little dashes. And I'm not going everywhere, just here and there. Because you just want to tell everybody, oh, it's a texture. There's a little rock up there, something. There's little dots and dashes. I'm going to do the same thing on this edge. I'm just going to pretend that I can see that edge. Now, if you have a hard time pretending that edge is there, take your pencil and you could draw that line down. Doesn't even have to be quite straight, but just have a little line there. And then when you start doing your rock, you just start from that edge and you go out. And you don't have to do it everywhere, just here and there. Little dots and dashes. And then that denotes the edge. Everybody sees that edge without having to draw a line there. This little window that's right there, I'm just going to do a couple little sevens, if you will. So there's one right there. There's another one right there. One there. One there. That's my window. Now I just hatch through those because it's dark. I'm going to hatch through those, leaving that little window pane showing through. And that whole facade, the facade means the front of the building. It's often a false front, but for this, it's just the front of the building. I'm just going to use little dots and dashes to kind of figure out where everything goes. Here's the tiles along that. These are just linear, so I'm just going back and forth. Sometimes if the window is really light, like there's a lot of light reflecting off of it, you can just put a couple little dots and dashes in it and call it good. This side has a little bit darker rock or brick, so I'm just going to kind of go in. And again, just dots and dashes starting from your edge, working over. I'm barely touching the paper. There's a little edge to your roof right there. So I am going to add a little line there. dots and dashes. I hope you notice too that you can see where my pencil was as I'm drawing along. I'm like, oh, that wasn't in the right place, so I changed it. That's okay. Get rid of your graphite, nobody ever knows. Why, they got lots of little windows. Guess that's a good thing. Most castles didn't have a lot of windows. It's a defensive thing. The more windows you got, the more people can get in. Sometimes in the later periods, they cut out windows, knocked them out of the brick because they needed them for light. And sometimes they had shutters over them. So this one tower over here, the edge is so light right in there, I can't see where it starts and stops. So I'm just going to draw a few little dark edges here and there and allow that edge to take care of itself. I'm not going to draw a line there because I don't see a line. So this is the exact same way we did the tower over here, except it's flat. Sometimes over the doorways there were these little things called maculations. It looks like a little window that sticks out, but the floor would be hollow. And that's so they could dump stuff on people that are trying to get in. Now, if these were rock, we could meander a little bit more. And it might be rock, but they're cut rock into brick. And so you got to be a little more linear with those. Because I want to get down to showing you how to do the water, I'm gonna go ahead and do the bridge. I'll do all these things later. We can do them a little bit later. But I'm just going to do this little edge of the bridge. And the bridge, there's a lot that you just can't see there. So I'm just going to kind of throw in a couple little dots and dashes. All that texture that's in there, the same kind of thing. If it's a little rockier, you can meander. This is meandering. It's back and forth. Just back and forth. And I'm thinking brick, but I'm not doing every little brick. I'm just going back and forth. And you can do little dots and dashes too in between. But just lightly touch it. Here's my arch. And again, I didn't draw that line in. There isn't really one there until you get right at the top, and then you can see kind of a little darker spot right there. And again, it gets kind of lost over there. I'm not really sure where it ends or, starts or stops. It's a couple little dots and dashes. There's some more meandering in there. Here's some more brick. And then the water that's here, let me just get this one last one in. About right in there somewhere. Somewhere up in there. If you want it to look like water, I know this water is almost mirror-like and the edges look really tight, but we want it to look like water. We want to tell everybody this is water. So one thing you want to do is just take your pencil or your pen, and it's again very linear. Water always sits level with the earth. And so I'm just going to look at some of those little dark areas. I can see them in my shadow, in my shine. I'm just going to go back and forth. I'm going to concentrate where the darkest areas are. I'm just going back and forth. Back and forth. You can be a little rounder, or you could just even leave your edges out completely. I'm just going back and forth. This is water. Just back and forth. You can do dots and dashes, but to be very, very linear back and forth like that. You can add little dots and dashes if you need it a little darker in different places. But hopefully, you're thinking to yourself, wow, that's easy. If there's a little shine in the water, like where the windows are, let me see if I can find some. Let's bounce out of that. So where these little windows are, instead of drawing little rectangles and stuff, you just kind of go in there and just go, okay, here's a window. Back and forth. Just concentrate on those little areas. There's a window right there. And it should be opposite. So you just kind of bring it down. Anything that's a little darker, don't be concerned with little details in there. Just back and forth. I think that's pretty much, you got it all figured out there. Very linear. Back and forth. It's very therapeutic. There's a little chimney over here and I can hardly see it. That's okay, because I'll just think, well, I'll cover it up with tree. Have my tree come out here and cover up all this stuff. I think it's kind of fun when limbs are just kind of hanging off there and you don't have to worry about anything. Just let them be there. This other part of this tower, I can't see it. The light is hitting it and everything. So I'm just going to draw in whatever I can see that's dark. Here's the little windows. I have no idea what this stuff is over here on the very right side. Looks like a building of some sort, but couldn't tell you. So I'm just going to throw in the little darks I see and call it good. I think I can probably get rid of all my graphite now. Not sure what's going on this other side where there's a roof there. I can see that, but not really sure what it is. That's okay. Just going to throw that in. It also helps to define this edge of this tree, the bottom edge. I'm just going to let that building help define that edge, whatever it is. You don't need a lot in the brick, just enough to tell your viewer of what it is. They're just little dots and dashes. It's amazing what one little dot will do as far as texture and value goes. I'm going to get rid of all my graphite just because it cleans it up, makes it nicer. You could even leave some of these trees just hanging out there. Everybody knows they're attached to something. Might be better to put some in there, but conceivably you could just leave them kind of hanging out there. I hope you guys had fun doing this. Hope you learned something. Hope somehow it makes your life a little bit better, knowing how to draw and drawing, because drawing can be very therapeutic. And I hope you all have a lovely day. And come back and draw with me again sometime.